Hello everybody and welcome to a beginning of a new project. Over on our Facebook page, Live Art, Journaling and Self-Development, this whole month of January we will be doing a junk journal where we will be creating all of our own pieces to pop into a lovely journal. And today we're going to make the cover. You're going to need some stiff cardboard to make the cover. I quite often use the backs of paper. You know when you buy a pack of paper, I quite often use the backs of that. This is some hardboard. You will need some hardboard to do the spine. You can also use mock board or photo mount paper. I'm just showing here on a piece of paper how we're going to construct it. You're going to need a front cover, you'll need a spine, and you need a back cover. These junk journals are going to be especially beautiful because we will have a peep through in the spine, which will mean we can see some of the edges of our pieces of paper. The other thing I use all the time for making my journals, and in fact I will do with this one, are old books, old hardback books. And I'm going to use that one that I've just placed to the side. So you're also going to need some duct tape or plumber's tape. I use the Gorilla tape, it's very, very strong. You can see I didn't have much on that one, so I used a slightly thinner one later on. You will need gel medium, not gel matte medium, it's not quite sticky enough for this project, an old paintbrush, and I like to use a squeegee or a window cleaning tool, which I use just to spread it out nice and thinly. A good ruler is pretty useful. I'm not the greatest for measuring anything, but I will do on this project. You need some old bits of fabric. Not necessarily ones that don't clash actually, I quite like it when they clash a bit. And you're also going to need some paper to cover up the inside of it. So on this, as I said, I'm going to use an old book cover. So I'm removing the front covers and I trim down the edges just to make sure that they're nice and flat on each side. And then I'm going to measure them to work out how big they are. So the front cover is a square with a hole cut out of it. The back cover also has part of the spine cut out of it. And then the spine is constructed of two rectangles which match the tops and bottoms of the back cover. So you can see me here, I'm just trimming it down and then I will cut out the middle bits. Now, I measure all this and I just write it down on my bit of scrap paper. Those of you who are heading over from the Live Art Journaling page will know that we've created a little notebook to put all of our notes in this year. And I'm going to take all these notes that I make and put them into that notebook so I've got it forever. And that way when I'm constructing all my ephemera and my pages and my signatures to go in this book, I can do that. Now what you see me doing here is finding out how to put in the middle section. There is absolutely no need to use exactly the same measurements as I am using, but if you zoom in you will be able to see the measurements that I use. When I'm getting my hole in the middle, I measure in 3 inches from each side and mark a little dot, and then I can cut out a section which is no bigger than about 1.5 inches in, or a ruler width. So you can see me cutting that out now. So as I said, I'm not going to give you exact measurements. If you do need some help with this project, I suggest you head on over to Live Art Journaling where you can make some comments on the page and I'll come over and obviously give you a hand and help you out. But essentially, once you've cut out your covers, you need to mark down how big they are. And then the spine is no wider than a ruler width. And you just need it to be exactly the same measurements as the top and the bottom sort of, you know, that front cover and that back cover, they look like a C shape, don't they? So those spines need to be the same height as those C's, and the width of them is a ruler width. So this is how we're going to place them onto our fabric, like this. And can you see in between those sections there is a tiny little gap? It's no bigger than about 1 millimetre or 2 millimetres, but enough so that when the book folds, it can fold. If you jut those bits of paper too close to each other, then it won't actually fold. So there are many ways to apply gel medium. One is with a paintbrush, and of course then you end up with quite a lot of clumpy bits. The other way is to get your squeegee, and I love doing this, and just cover it with that. It means you get a lovely thin coating, and for bookbinding this is really good because we don't want too many lumpy bits. It'll take forever to dry, and we need a nice sort of consistency of spreading that glue over. I might even use this technique to spread my toast tomorrow morning. So you need to glue all of those pieces up, lay them down on your fabric, and then you need to let it sit. Let it sit for a good couple of hours underneath some heavy books, and that'll mean it lies nice and flat. So here you can see that gap in between the sections, just making sure that it will open and close easily when we have it. Lots of people make the mistake of jutting their spines up too close to each other, and then when you come and try and fold it, obviously it hasn't got any give in it. Okay, so as I said earlier, once you've glued all your pieces down and put them onto your fabric, you then need to put some heavy books on top of it and just let them sit for a good couple of hours. Make sure you obviously haven't got any glue on there where it's gonna stick to the books. So here you can see me transferring all of my notes into that little notebook that we have created on the Facebook page. This means that later on, when I come to work out what I want to put in my journal and how big I need it to be, I've got all of my measurements written down forever and ever. I don't need to keep getting a ruler out and re-measuring everything. Okay, so time for the duct tape, or plumber's tape, or gorilla tape, whatever you call it. Now what we're going to need to do, because we've got those gaps in our spines, we need to make sure that that's not going to be a weak point where everything's going to rip and fall apart. So I take my duct tape, and I need it the same, I need it to go along that crack basically. I stick down just one edge of it, and then I get a ruler and I pull it along, and I push my ruler down into the crack and then fold the tape over. Again, if you put this too tight over and you don't push that bit down into the crack, what can end up happening is that you've stuck that tape so tight that the book won't actually fold. Essentially what we're doing is we're making hinges out of tape and fabric and bits of cardboard. So again, I put this down, I stick it down along one side, pop my ruler down into the little fold, and then use my fingers to bring it over. In a minute, what you're going to see is that I also do exactly the same thing with some longer pieces of tape along the length. So I stick it down just on one end, take my ruler, push it down into the crack, work it along, and do exactly the same thing. We're going to have a lovely sturdy spine at the end of this. Okay, time to start doing some gluing again. So I'm just going to trim off all of these little edges of duct tape, and you're going to see later on actually I miss a little bit and have to take it off later on. So I'm going to cut out the middle section. Little tip, when you're cutting out your fabric, don't go right into the corner, leave about a millimetre or so, and that way when you've glued it all together, it covers the edge of the board or the edge of the book that you're working from. So I'm going to get my gel medium out again and my paintbrush and my squeegee, and I'm going to give this a really good glue. Now, of course, what would have been really useful is if I'd have cut my folding tabs over before I'd glued it up. But essentially, when you're cutting those darts out, don't cut it at a straight diagonal. Cut like a wide L shape. And that way, and again, leaving about a millimetre at each edge, you're going to see me fold those over right at the end. This way, if you cut that sort of lapsed L shape, you don't end up missing any bits. You don't end up with great big cracks on the other side. Now what you can see is as I fold those bits over, and I do opposite edges each time, and as I fold them over, I put some gel medium actually on the top of the fabric and squeegee that out. This really does mean that it's going to stick down nice and solidly. Once I get all the way round and I've stuck all of my fabric down, I then get some gel medium on my fingers and I go round those corners, and I'm just putting gel medium underneath the little flappy bit on the corners and sort of teasing them round the edges. It gives a lovely soft edge to the corners and means that you don't end up with any little bits of cardboard peeping through. So again, leaving all that to dry solidly, we've now got the fun job of decorating it. Now you can just get a strip of fabric and glue it down wrapped around each edge. That will look just as beautiful. Or you can go a little bit further and bling it up, and here I've stitched a piece of fabric onto an old net curtain and put a little bit of sequin ribbon on it. I made it obviously a little bit wider than the gap there, so I had to trim down so that I had enough to wrap round. I wouldn't just glue it to the front without having a wrap round. That wrap round to the other side will just stop it unpeeling from your board. So gel medium, again, it's going to be our best friend for making this front cover. I stick it down, pull that flap round, stick that down, and the outside edge I'm just going to leave right until the end, because we're going to have a paper layer to do now on the inside, and I wanted those ribbon edges to come over the top of the paper. I didn't want it underneath it. So in a minute I'm going to get some paper. You can use wipe-off paper, you could use scrapbooking paper. I end up using some handmade Locter paper that I bought recently on a trip to Bruges. But what you do is just put it over your board, make sure that it covers the whole thing. Then you trace through the hole that you've got in the middle. Then you stick it down, and like we did with the gaffer tape or plumber's tape, you use your ruler to embed it into those creases on the inside. You're going to watch me do all this, don't worry. So here you can see this is where it's going to stick. You would then turn it over, trace through the hole, cut that out and stick that down. But as I said, I decided to use a piece of Locta paper. I'm doing exactly the same thing here. I've measured it all up. Now I'm drawing around that inside. I'll cut that out and glue it down. And then you can keep on decorating it. So what you'll see later on is that I glue this down, then I pull my fabric tabs over, and then I add a little bit of scrapbooking paper to it. Please do whatever you want. This is the front cover of your journal. It's the thing that is going to sit on the coffee table and entice you to play more and more. Go for as many coverages of gel medium as you want. As you can see here, putting loads on. Gel medium, when it dries, is an amazing tough glue. It does need time to dry. Please don't do this and then imagine that you can start working on the signatures and sewing them all in straight away, because everything will stick to it. A good couple of days air drying will mean that you have a wonderfully solid and hard wearing front cover. As you can see here, I've just taken that gel medium and gone around the edges again. Now I'm taking my ruler and pushing that paper down into those creases. Obviously, the thicker the paper you use to do the inserts, the harder it is to push down into those creases. Locta paper, which is what I've used, is quite a durable tissue paper type medium. When I'd stuck my lacy ribbon back over the edges, I just realised I really loved that original scrapbooking paper that I had, and I wanted to have a couple of little bits just on the insides. So I'm just sticking those down too. In the end, when we've finished these junk journals, we're actually going to have pockets on the front and back. So it may or may not be that you see these bits, but you know, that's the fun, isn't it? Creating all these layers and then seeing how they develop. I really hope that you will head over to the Facebook page and be part of January, where we will be taking this front cover and turning it into a wonderfully playful junk journal crossed with an art journal. So we'll not only be making all of the signatures and the ephemera to go within it using junk, we will also be creating artwork to fill this lovely book. I'll see you on Facebook.